Have you ever felt like the world you trusted, the systems, the leaders, the institutions have all betrayed you, let you down? Like the ground beneath your feet has crumbled, leaving you stranded in a landscape of chaos and disillusionment. For those recovering from complex PTSD, this feeling is all too familiar. The betrayals that shatter our personal lives are mirrored on a global scale. Governments falter, celebrities fall from grace, and the institutions that we once relied on for stability seem to dismantle before our eyes. It's overwhelming. It can feel like there's no way forward. But what if I told you that there's hope, not in the grand promises of broken systems, but in something much smaller, much closer to home? What if the answers lie not in rebuilding those towering structures, but in rediscovering the power of small, connecting communities? Today we're going to explore how E.F. Schumacher's revolutionary book, Small is Beautiful, written back in the 1970s, offers a roadmap for healing, not just for our fractured world, but for your fractured soul. I'm Roach, Mark Roach, and welcome to Transcendent, my YouTube channel, where I share my journey in dealing with complex PTSD. This work was shared with me, Schumacher's work, Small is Beautiful, and it was shared by a man who was number 2 in a major one of the largest corporation in the world for much of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And he had a high-ranking position there, number 2 man in the 70s, and he also ran the technical arm for one of the largest state-owned energy companies in the world back in the 70s. So I had the chance for him to be my mentor, and as his engineer, I modeled like the supply and demand studies for large governments, huge corporate clients, and even super rich and powerful, influential Texans. And yet, even amidst all this big, I found myself drawn to Schumacher's ideas about smallness, which were shared with me by this individual kind of on the side as an encouragement to me about connecting to community, and I found it very instrumental in giving hope in this new era of reconnecting with a lot of disillusionment of government, of entities that we've trusted in the past that have kind of failed and fallen apart, including organized religion. So, and in an era when there's all these overreaching philosophies and politics and polarities, and this aspiration for large-scale solutions that can reach scale and work for everyone, even though there's so much diversity and differences between people around the world and even in communities, just like right here in Austin, Texas. Those large-scale solutions, seem to be very difficult to reach across all of the uniquenesses that we find in our society and amongst us as individuals. So I find this comforting. So I'm going to share some of Schumacher's work here, and hopefully you'll also find some comfort and maybe some guidance, from it. Because we live in a culture obsessed with bigger houses, bigger corporations, bigger governments. We're told that growth is always good. You have to be aspiring to something. You got to go get educated. You need a certificate. You need an identity, and to survive. But what happens when big becomes too big to care, too big to pay attention to you or me, too big to see us, too big to hear our pain or feel our pain? Well, Schumacher saw this coming decades ago. In Small is Beautiful, he warned us that economies built on endless growth and massive institutions would eventually collapse under their own weight. He argued that these systems prioritize profit over people, efficiency over empathy. Doesn't that sound familiar? It's not just about economics, it's about life itself. Many of us have experienced relationships or environments where we were treated as expendable resources rather than human beings with inherent worth. Maybe it was a toxic workplace where you were just another cog in the machine. Maybe it was a family dynamic where your needs were just ignored because someone else's agenda took priority. Then for those of us recovering from complex PTSD, this realization can be both painful and hopefully liberating. Yes, liberating, because painfully it forces us to confront how deeply we've been hurt by systems that have denied our feelings, denied the realities that we've seen in our betrayals that we've uncovered it, kind of the anomalies of society, the things that people just don't want to talk about and that we really don't really want to burden other people with, but we have to heal. So whether it's personal or societal, things that were supposed to protect us often failed. This can be liberating because this opens the door to something new, the possibility of finding safety again and belonging in something more smaller, more intentional, some space that is very personal and is within your reach right now, in the moment, today. Schumacher reminds us that bigger isn't always better. In fact, bigger often means losing sight of what really matters. Human connection, trust, and care. Schumacher believed that true economics as if people mattered, must start small. He championed local communities and human-scale solutions over sprawling bureaucracies and faceless corporations. Why? Because smaller systems are inherently more accountable. They're built on relationships rather than transactions, trust rather than exploitation. This idea resonates deeply for those navigating complex PTSD. When trust has been shattered by family, by institutions, by society, it's often impossible to rebuild it on a large scale. But within smaller tribes, tight-knit communities where people truly see and care for one another, healing becomes possible. Let me share a personal story here. When I was at my lowest point, struggling under the weight of trauma and betrayal, I found solace not only in grand gestures or sweeping changes, but in small acts of kindness from those around me. A neighbor who checked in on me when I hadn't left my house for days, and a friend sat in with me in silence just because words felt too heavy. Those moments reminded me that healing doesn't require massive interventions. It requires connection. Imagine living in a community where your worth isn't measured by your productivity or your ability to conform, but by your own humanity, where neighbors look out for one another, not because they have to, but because they want to, where decisions are made collectively with everyone's voice heard and respected. These aren't utopian fantasies. They're principles Schumacher believed could reshape our world, and they're already being practiced in intentional communities around the globe. One of Schumacher's most profound insights was his critique of modern economics as soulless and destructive. He argued that economies should serve people, not the other way around, and that they must operate within the ecological limits of our planet. For someone recovering from trauma, this concept can feel deeply validating. Trauma often leaves us feeling used up, discarded, as though we've been treated as less than. Schumacher's vision flips this narrative on its head. You are not expendable. You're not a resource to be exploited. You're part of something sacred, a web of relationships that includes not just other people, but also the earth itself. This idea is revolutionary because it challenges us to rethink what we value, not just as individuals, but as societies. What if success wasn't measured by GDP, or by profit margins, or by how well we care for one another? What if we prioritize sustainability over short-term gains? In practical terms, this means embracing what Schumacher called appropriate technologies, small-scale solutions tailored to local needs. It means supporting local businesses instead of faceless corporations. It means growing food in community gardens instead of relying on industrialized agriculture. These choices may seem small, but they add up to something profound, an economy rooted in integrity and care. One of the hardest parts about recovering from complex PTSD is learning how to trust again. Not just others, but yourself. When institutions fail us on a massive scale, it's easy to feel hopeless, to feel that nothing and no one can be trusted. But here's where Steiner's philosophy offers hope. Trust doesn't have to start big, it can start small. It can start with one person who shows up for you consistently, a friend who listens without judgment, or an online community where you feel seen and understood. It can start with one group where you feel safe again, safe enough to share your story. A support group or a circle of like-minded individuals committed to mutual care. And these small circles grow. They connect with one another. And as they create something larger, a network of trust that doesn't rely on broken systems or corrupt leaders or on human relationships emerges, but rather on human relationships that are real, that you can touch and judge for yourself and take responsibility for and engage in. Those are the kind of human relationships that you need to heal. Not those that rely on philosophies and celebrities and popularity and broken systems. This is how we rebuild. Not through these grandiose plans or sweeping reforms, but through small acts of courage and connection. Schumacher's vision wasn't just about economics. It was about creating a world where people and the planet Earth, comes first. A world where healing is possible because we've reconnected with what truly matters. For those recovering from trauma, this vision offers a powerful metaphor. Just as economies must shrink down to human scale to regain their integrity, so too must we rebuild our lives, one step at a time. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments, in conversations with trusted friends, in acts of self-care, in finding purpose through meaningful work or connection. And just as Schumacher believed that small communities could change the world, I believe that your healing, your courage to face your pain and rebuild your life can ripple outwards in ways that you can't even imagine. The world may feel broken right now, just as you feel broken inside, but remember this, beauty often emerges from brokenness. Just as Schumacher found hope in small things, in villages instead of cities, relationships instead of transactions, you too can find hope in the small steps you take toward healing. You don't have to fix everything all at once. You don't have to trust every institution or every person who crosses your path. But you can start small with one act of kindness, one moment of connection, and watch those small acts grow into something beautiful. Because when we embrace the power of small, we discover something profound. Even in a world full of betrayal and collapse, there is still room for love, for trust, for hope, and for healing. Thank you for joining me today on Transcendent. if this message resonated with you, or if you found healing through small steps, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Let's build this community together, one small act at a time. I'm Mark Roach, wishing you all the best.